Hello and welcome to today's webinar on automating business processes using SharePoint Designer 2010 workflows and InfoPath 2010 forms. We're going to begin the webinar shortly, but first I want to remind everyone attending that this is a hands-on webinar, which means that each one of you are going to have access to a SharePoint environment hosted by CloudShare, and you're going to get to use this during the session. To follow along with the presenter's steps during the webinar using your own CloudShare environment, be sure to click on the link that is showing in the chat window now on your screen. Once you click on that link, it's going to open up your very own CloudShare environment to use and follow along with the presenter during today's session. Please know that this webinar will be recorded today and we're going to make it available to everyone on our website later. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them using the chat and question windows that you see in the GoToMeeting console on your screen, and we'll do our very best to answer them during today's session. We'll get started in just about 1 minute. I'm going to introduce our presenter. Asif Rehmani is going to be presenting today. He's been training and consulting on primarily SharePoint technology since 2004. He is a SharePoint Server MVP and MCT. He runs a SharePoint Videos website, which I'm sure he's going to tell us all the URL for during today's webinar, which provides SharePoint Designer, and InfoPath video tutorials. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn the session over to Asif.
All right, thanks a lot, Sonia. Appreciate that. Can you hear me okay, first of all?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So welcome, everybody, and thank you very much for joining and spending this hour with us. I'm hoping and wishing that this hour that you have planned to spend with us is productive. As was mentioned, that you want to get access to your CloudShare environment right away. That's the first thing you want to do. We're going to be moving fast. We're going to be doing a lot of different things, and I would love for you to get your hands dirty with diving into the environment, clicking around, and doing different things that I'll be showing you. So let me do a quick introduction, a little bit more detail of who I am. As was said before, I'm a SharePoint MVP and a Microsoft Certified Trainer. SharePointVideos.com is the site that I am a principal contributor at, and you'll find all different tutorials on things fundamental to SharePoint, and then also much more advanced stuff like reporting services, access services, branding, SharePoint Designer, workflow, and a lot of other stuff that you can find at SharePointVideos.com, so check that out. I'm also a in-person trainer for critical path training. Do those around the country. Also love to come and speak to conferences. I'm sure I've met many of you in person as well, so good to see you again, or good to meet you, be talking to you again, I guess, in the webinar, and hope to see you again at another conference. And had the pleasure to author multiple books, the latest one now being the SharePoint 2013 First Look for Power Users. Let me zoom in on that a little bit. So this is that one right here. In addition to that, before was SharePoint Designer, and then before that, the real world SharePoint 2010, and before that, contributed to SharePoint Designer 2007. So that's a little bit about myself. Let's jump into the webinar. First, some webinar-related resources. This slide I will be putting up at the end as well, so you don't have to rush and write everything down right now, but this link is just a shortcut link, a short link to the link that you already have to the environment. So I hope that you're already in the environment, in CloudShare environment. There are additional scenarios in that environment as well, meaning in addition to what I'll be showing you, there's additional stuff in there as well. And I'll show that to you once we get in. Also, there's a short video showing the end-to-end solution within, I believe, about 12 or so minutes. So if you wanted to see just that specifically right now, of course, the complete thing you'll be seeing when you have the webinar recording available. So look out for that. But there's this link also, which will get you access, direct access right now on the SharePointVideos.com site to a quick video of seeing a similar scenario of what we'll be doing today. And like was said before, that this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available by CloudShare, just like other webinars. So I'll put this slide up at the end once again, so you can copy some of these links down if you need to. A couple of, well, 3 tips for a good hands-on experience. Jump in, follow the steps, get your hands dirty. This is not really just a webinar. This is more like a workshop, right? So it would be better if you jump in and start clicking around. Try not to focus on every single thing, because there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to be going on. And if you try to focus on and try to do every single click, you'll get left behind and you might miss some important stuff. So that's my advice to you. If you have a couple of monitors available, put the GoToWebinar screen on one monitor, so that's where I'm showing you stuff, and the other monitor you can go ahead and actually do the clicks. That will help as well. And of course, enjoy the process. Don't worry about the final product at this time. You'll have plenty of time afterwards to go ahead and do what you need to do, but you don't worry about getting the perfect product at this time. And of course, the last thing, queue up your questions in the Q&A panel in the GoToWebinar, and we'll go ahead and answer it as I can. Okay. Let's see, 1 second here. All right. This is the actual CloudShare environment. No Code Solutions by SharePointVideos.com. Hands-on webinar. That's what you have a link to once you get in. Once the environment is running, you will click on the View Machine. Once you click on the View Machine, that's where it's going to start up the environment. If you're having any issues getting into the environment, I'm sure you can put it into the Q&A section there as well, and someone should be able to help you. But I just wanted to give you a visual of what it looks like once you get into CloudShare environment. My assumptions of who you are, what the audience is today, is you have basic InfoPath and SharePoint Designer knowledge. If you have already good advanced knowledge, then some of the stuff is going to be repeat for you. Hopefully, if you fall into that category, you still get something out of it. And somebody who's looking to see how all the pieces fit together for InfoPath, form library forms, workflow forms, SharePoint Designer workflow, some tips and tricks in there. Also with Visio, what are the limitations in Visio? What can you do or what can you not do? So things like that. If you want to see the end-to-end solution, then you're in the right place. Here's a process we're going to follow. It's a 5-step process. The design InfoPath expense form, template, and publish a form library. Design workflow form using Visio. Configure workflow using SharePoint Designer and publish it, of course. Then you got modify workflow form using InfoPath. So the workflow form that gets created, modify that. And then the last one, creating visualization using Visio Services. All right, and hopefully this will all become real to you once you start looking at it, seeing exactly how this is done. All right, one last thing here. There's a lot of stuff that's going to be going on, of course, lots of moving pieces. I'm not expecting you to remember everything. You can, so don't memorize the clicks. I would recommend watch the video recordings. And then when you're implementing a similar process, follow along to get it done. Okay, without further ado, we're jumping in. So about 50 or so minutes remaining, and we're going to spend the whole time inside the environment. What I would like to do at this time is just do a quick pause as I flip over to the other environment. And Sonia, if there's any questions that you're seeing from folks in the Q&A panel, if you have anything as I flip over, let me know.
And I'm checking the question and chat panels now, and I'm not seeing any questions from anybody yet. Just want to remind everyone, don't be shy during the webinar. Be sure to post your questions in the chat window, and Asif will do his best to answer them.
Absolutely. All right. So once you get into the environment, and once again, as I was mentioning before, this is when you click on the View Environment button, you'll get a screen like that. Right? This is the screen that you should see. And I'm putting this in full screen mode, so you should be able to see everything. If you are not seeing this specific screen, which you should because that's the starting point, just go to our desktop, double-click on the SharePointVideos.com demos right here, and that will bring you to that screen. And that's the top-level site of the site collection that we'll be working in right now. as I was mentioning before, there's actually a bunch of different demonstrations that have been pre-built into this environment. So once you have access to this environment, you have access to all of these things. The second one is the one we're going to be focusing on, which is automating business processes using Visio, SharePoint Designer, InfoPath. But you got this one here, which is customizing SharePoint list forms using SharePoint Designer, InfoPath. You have this one, which is using the data view and list view web parts in SharePoint Designer. And you also have the demonstration of business connectivity services using SharePoint Designer. Maybe, who knows, in the future we'll do a webinar focusing on other scenarios, but currently for this demonstration I'm going to click here where it says click here for the demonstration of automating business processes using SharePoint Designer, Visio, and InfoPath. Okay? Now, this is, like I said, completely pre-built. Check this out and all. We're going to build pieces of it. So we're going to actually, like I said, get our hands dirty and get into this stuff. But I would recommend, once you have time, to go ahead and read this through, understand the scenario completely. Also click on this link right here. I'm going to open this up in a new tab. And that's actually the link to that video that I was talking about, which shows the end-to-end process. So here's the one that's opening up. And I'm not going to wait for it to come up and everything, but this will come up. Here we go. Actually, it did come up. So this is the video which this in here talks about the training request process. We're doing the expense request process or expense reimbursement process. It's a little bit different, but end-to-end scenario here too that you can watch if you so wish. All right. So as I was mentioning before, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to jump into designing the form. Now, the form we're designing is using InfoPath. InfoPath is not a free product. You do need to buy it, or it comes with Office Professional Plus, Office Enterprise, etc. If you don't have InfoPath, that's probably the reason. Probably is that I mean, if you don't have InfoPath in your own environment, in your own laptop, the reason is probably that the administrator has decided to not put it there. Most probably, most organizations who have an enterprise agreement with Microsoft have InfoPath. So if you do have InfoPath, you'll find it under Microsoft Office right here. InfoPath Designer, InfoPath Filler. Now, so in InfoPath Designer, which is the main design environment, when you get into it, you have the SharePoint form library form, SharePoint list forms, email forms, etc. There's lots of good stuff here. Our focus today is SharePoint form library form. And there's already a form that's pre-designed or almost pre-designed, but I just wanted you to see how this looks from scratch. So I'm going to double click on this, and you're welcome to do so as well. Within that, this is where it's a very much Word-like environment. Those of you who have worked with InfoPath know how easy it is to work with this application, to design your forms, etc. Right? So you get in here and you start typing what the form is about. So the form heading would go here. You're welcome to put pictures and other kind of stuff like that. Right? Then you have headings for the or subheadings really for each section. So section 1 over here. Section 2 over here. Other things to play around with and get comfortable with this environment would be to go into page design and look at the page layout templates that are available. You can change that to something else if you want. Also, there's plenty of different themes available, so you don't have to stick to the initial light green or something that's there right now. You can switch it around to something else. Yeah. All the themes on top over here are SharePoint specific themes. So if you were to choose summer theme in SharePoint or Vantage, there's a bunch of them, convention, that you'll find in SharePoint, and you're designing a form for that SharePoint site, well, the theme, the colors, and all that stuff is going to match if you pick the same type of form, of course. Okay, so these are just the basics of this. What I'm going to do is, at this point, I'm going to out of InfoPath to get out of this window, because as I mentioned that we already have an InfoPath start form that we're going to start with. So if you are following along at this time, go to the desktop And from the desktop, you're going to see the expense report form _ start. Now, if you double click on it, it's going to start up in the fill mode. We don't want to start it up in fill mode. We want to start this up in design mode. So you have to right click on it and click on design. Okay, so if you right click and click on design, you get to this point. Here's our old logo actually. It's been retired since then. But anyway, how do you put this stuff in? Well, to put in a logo like that or some kind of picture, you would just, as I said before, insert picture, get your picture, and just like Word, it will put it in. You can resize it the way you want. For each of these sections here, what we have are different widgets, the different controls, and all the controls are available in the Home tab, and the Home tab over here. And within the Home tab, you have these controls, right? All right. The controls that we currently have in place, we got text boxes, we got drop-down controls, date picker, and more text boxes. And then we have something called a repeating table down here. All right, and all these things, of course, you'll find in here. Now, what I'm going to do is the following. Show you how this looks like right now. Home tab and preview. So before you make any changes, check out to see what it looks like currently, right? As I said before, you have the text box. That text box doesn't give you any help right now. You just have to put your name in there. Department is pulling up some information from somewhere, so we'll figure that out in a minute. Then you have phone. Let's see if I just put some stuff in here. Oh, it accepts it. Doesn't really care if it's not nicely formatted into a phone, a real phone. Okay. Date, it's pulling up today's date. I could change it to some different date. Email. Once again, I'm getting away with putting in any email here, any kind from email. For the repeating table, if I put in some stuff here, that's going to be okay, I think. Now, it would be pretty awesome if it took the quantity times the price and did a subtotal, and also that subtotal would also populate the final total. Right? So these things are the things we're going to configure right now. So I just wanted to have you see exactly what it looks like currently before we start configuring it. I'm going to close the preview, get back here. All the stuff that you're seeing here, all the things, all the widgets and stuff here are represented here on the right side in the fields, right? So in the fields, we see the employee name. When I click on it, it selects the text box called employee name. That's where the value is stored, and this is where the value is shown in the text box. Well, what I want to do in this case is I do not want a text box. There's another control that I'm aware of, and that's called let's check this out over here. It's called Person Group Picker control. So I want to use that instead. I'm going to go over here once again to the employee name, and I'm going to delete it. So just hitting the delete key. Okay. Now, this data source employee name has not disappeared. We have to make this or delete this as well, otherwise it's going to hang around. So I'm going to hit this over here and hit delete right here. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes. So what I'm really doing effectively is taking the actual data source, deleting that, because the data source can be represented on the form in any shape or form, shape or form. And currently it was represented by a text box. Well, that data source itself could just contain some text value, and that text box can just show that text value, and that's not enough for what I'm looking for. So now, where I'm in the the area here right by name, I'm going to go ahead and go to my controls and pick the person group picker. Just click on it once and it puts it there. Makes it really big, so let's make it smaller. All right, and if you're missing some of these steps as you're following along, don't worry. Like I said, just play around with it, get your hands dirty, and then come back to the video to understand exactly how it's done. I'm going to double click on this So the control tools properties show up either here in the name up top under the control tools properties, or on the right where it says group and it's got the person group picker controls, the different attributes basically shown. I'm going to double click on group, and that shows me the group properties window. I'm going to change that to be employee name. Make sure there's no spaces in the actual name. Spaces are not allowed in the fields. I'll click OK. Alright, so that is a person group picker control right here, of course, and this is the representation of that. That's the actual data on the right in the fields, right? Okay, moving onwards. Department. If I click on the control tools properties after having selected the department drop-down and then I click on the Edit Choices button, it shows me that currently the choices are entered manually. So you just click on Add and you continue adding the choices. But instead of doing that, I'm going to say that let's look for the choices from an external data source. Well, that external data source in this case is, well, there's already one there. It's called department. Where is that coming from? Well, department, I'm going to cancel here for a second and show you what the data source or how this is defined. In the data tab up top, if I click on data connections, department shows up here, and if I click on, well, I don't have to click on anything because at the bottom here shows me that the SharePoint site that it's coming from is intranet.contoso.com/sites/finance. Okay, what about if I open up another tab or just use this tab over here and put intranet.contoso.com. Also, there's a synonym for the intranet, and I'm at the finance site collection right now. So in here, if I go to, here we go, department list, here's a list, HR, manufacturing, R&D. So let me quickly show you, if you had to make this data connection from scratch, how would you make it? You would take this URL, right, and you're welcome to do it if you like. You can take this URL, copy the URL to that specific list, flip back to InfoPath, let's add a new connection, so add. Now, this connection is to receive data. So that's correct, receive data. Next. There are a bunch of different options that I have to receive data from. SOAP Web Service, REST Web Service, SharePoint Library or List, Database. It says SQL Server only, but you can actually get information from other types of databases. And then also you have XML document. In my case, SharePoint Library or List is what I want. So next, and I'm going to go ahead and paste in the URL. Next. Then automatically it selects the department list, which is the exact list that I want to get information from. So I'll click on next here. Then when it shows me the different fields that are available in department, I'm going to select title as well. Next, do I want to store a copy of the data in the form template? Not really. I want to get it dynamically every time that opens up. So I'll click on next. And since I already have a department connection, it's making it department 1, so that's fine. I'll click on finish. Here it is. That's my source, right? So that's how you make the actual source. Let me close this out right now. Go back to my department drop down. And once again, if I go to Control Tools Properties, go to Edit Choices here. Now when I click on Get Choices from an External Data Source, I have Department and Department 1 showing up, both of these guys, right? So either of them, when you pick that, the value that I'm looking for, when I click on this button that's next to the value text box, I get the choices ID or title. And title is what I'm interested in, so I'm going to select that. For display name, once again, title is what I'm looking for, so let me select that and click OK. And at any time, if you want to check out exactly your work, the way it's going, you go to the Home tab, click on Preview, and within Preview, okay, this is just a warning for the designer. It won't appear later. Here we go. It shows the different departments coming from that list, right? Okay. Going a little bit faster this time now, because otherwise we're going to run out of time if you go this slow here. For phone, I'm going to click on Manage Rules and make a new validation rule. Okay, new validation rule. So that is going to be a rule that's going to, of course, validate what's in the actual phone field. The condition, when I click on none, I have choices for phone. What do you want to compare the phone field to? So how about if phone does not match a certain pattern? And in here I can click on select a pattern and choose the phone number pattern. So phone number pattern is already there. You can define your own as well by clicking on custom pattern and making it. This is a guide right here where it shows you what to put in when you're looking for a hyphen, for example, or any character or any digit, etc. So use that. Currently I'm just going to use phone number. Click OK. Of course you can add additional conditions as well in this case, or additional rules as part of the condition. This time I'm not going to do that. So I only have one condition or one rule within the condition. Click OK. Screen tip is going to be phone not valid. Alrighty. Next, we'll go to email. Once again, the rules window is still open, so I'm going to click on new validation. You probably noticed that same thing in condition for email. There's also an email pattern. So you can say email does not match pattern, select a pattern, and here's the email pattern. We didn't used to have an email pattern in 2007 version of InfoPath, but here there is, so that's good. You have that. You click on OK, and now you're all set. Screen tip, email not valid. Okay, so that's how you can design these things. Confirm email, you can do all validation here as well. And for this condition, of course, is going to be that if confirm email is not equal to, and then of course you have to pick the field that you want to check against. So select a field or group, and email is the field that I want to compare the confirm email to, obviously. Here we go. If confirm email is not equal to email, then there's a problem. So emails don't match. Always remember, screen tips are mandatory, so you got to put that in there. For the expense details here, let me configure this quickly. Expense details subtotal field. When I double click on this, go to Control Tools Properties and go to Default Value. I can click on the FX button over here. That lets me put in a function. So insert function, and the function here I can say, actually, you know what? I'm sorry. Instead of doing insert function, I'm going to do insert field. If I do insert field, I can choose the quantity field, right? Quantity field is this one. And then I can multiply that by, and that's just asterisk, insert field, and that's going to be price. So quantity times price is equal to subtotal, obviously. Lastly, final total. When you go here, you can go ahead and put in a default value for that as well. So the default value for final total is going to be a sum function. Insert sum function. And the field that you want to sum up is going to be subtotal, which is right here. Yeah? So that's how you would accomplish that. You would sum the subtotal to get the final total. You can do some additional stuff as well if you wanted. So, you know, if you say, hey, if it's above a certain value, maybe turn it to red, some visual indication, right? And you can do that really quickly by going to Add Rule, and this will let you do a quick or wizard-driven rule saying that if it's greater than a certain value, go ahead and format it as red or green or yellow. I'll do red. Then of course it's going to ask me what is that value, and I'll put in 1,000. And there it is, right? So made it quickly enough. I'm going to go to the Home tab, click on Preview, and see exactly what it's doing right now. Don't worry about this warning. It won't show up in the production. So first of all, for name, I can go ahead and actually pick a name here. I can click on the directory here, and that's going to go into my company directory, Active Directory in this case specifically. And if I do a search for myself, let's do myself, okay. Oh, yep. I have been named as CEO of this company. Awesome. So I selected myself. Department. That's coming from the list. Phone number. I can't get away with just anything. It has to be a nicely formatted number. Now, of course, it's only expecting this format. If you want to use a different format, you can have to put a different condition in there. Okay, that's not good. That's actually not the phone number. That's standard. See, this is valid, but I'm not actually using this as valid, so I have to put in this format specifically. So you would have to add additional formats, is what I'm saying. Okay, for email, this is my email, but let's say I forget about the .com. Oh, it reminds me it's not correct. Here we go. Okay, and confirm email, I'm going to do, well, of course, currently it does not match, and so I'll do what all of you guys, I'm sure, do. Copy, paste. There you go. Right? For subtotal, let's put some quick stuff in there. Flight, quantity 1, price 3, and here we go. That doesn't make any sense, 300. Okay, subtotal is that. Great. Now, if I put a different item in there, like hotel, have it 4 nights, be 200 per night. Ooh, that went over 1,000, and now it's turning this into red, right? Okay, so that's our form. This is a form that was designed by InfoPath for the expense reporting purposes, and you can go ahead and put it into the form library by following this procedure. You go into File tab. From File tab, you go into Publish. From Publish, you'll see SharePoint Server. There's other locations as well that it's going to, say you can publish to email, you can publish to network location, but trust me, if you're working with SharePoint, you should be publishing it to SharePoint. There's lots of advantages of doing that. When you do File Publish SharePoint, here you provided the exact location where you want it to go. Next. Do you want it to be a form library form? Do you want to encompass it into a content type? Which would be a good idea, but it's a little bit more advanced functionality, so I won't do that right now. Form library is what I want. Lots of existing form libraries. In fact, the one that I'm looking for is already there, but I'll just go ahead and make a new one right now. So next. Now, the name of the library, of course, is extremely arbitrary. So expense report. Fill out expense reports here for reimbursement. Something like that. Yeah? So we're making a new library, right? Click on next. These are the four different fields in the form: department, email, date, and final total that will get transferred over. The reason it knows about these is because I had added them initially when designing the form. Of course, if they were not there, you just click on Add, pick the field that you want to promote as a column in the library, and it will take it. The reason you would want to do this, by the way, is because when these columns are available in the library, in the InfoPath form library, those will be searchable. Those will be available for sorting, for filtering, for creating views on. So there's many, many different benefits. In addition to, of course, one of the big benefits is you can use that field in a workflow when you attach a workflow to that library. All right, so you can do all these different things. I'm going to click on Next over here, click on Publish. I won't worry about this specific form because I already have another form, but I just wanted to show you how this is done. So if you're following along, or if you want to jump in right now and follow along with some of the stuff, that's fine too. You can just go to, okay, just ask me for credentials. I'm just going to cancel here. No worries, because like I said, this form we're just going to put out there, but we're not going to use this specific one. Okay, so that's kind of funny. It went ahead and published it anyway. Okay. I'm going back to my Human Resources site. In my Human Resources site, which once again, if you're not at, this is a sub-site of the top-level intranet site, so intranet/HR. In here, if you go to expense reports, you'll see there's already a bunch of expense reports here, and there's some other stuff going on here. So first of all, when you do publish the InfoPath form to a library like this one, expense reports, it makes a library, of course. It's empty. There's nothing in there to begin with, because all you have done before is put the form template into the library. You have not started filling out the form. When a user comes and clicks on Add Document, the form appears, and then you start typing in different things, right? So is there a John? I'm sure there's a John. Okay, no exact match, no problem. Lots of different Johns. There's even a John. Pretty cool. John Evans, let's do that. Department, choosing this one. Phone number, once again, there we go. So it's validating how the phone number gets put in. And I won't go ahead and put all the stuff in there. I just wanted to show you that this is the same form that I showed you before in InfoPath, right, in the preview. So for this functionality to work, like it's working right now, let me put in some notes in a notepad. you need to have forms server running. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Okay. So you must have forms server running. If you're not getting the form in the browser, the reason is forms server is not running. This is where you talk to your SharePoint server administrator and tell them that, hey, forms server is required for me to make forms, online forms, InfoPath forms, okay? Form server you already have. If you have SharePoint Server Enterprise, it just needs to be running to produce this type of functionality. Let me close this right now, not save the changes, because what I want to do is jump into the next step, which is once you have this library, a library like this one, what you could do is automate the process of once somebody completes the form, what should happen after that, right? Somebody goes in and throws a form in there. Well, you probably want to kick off an expense approval process, which is what this is right here. So to design this process, to design the workflow, you have a couple of different choices. Well, actually you have multiple choices, but a couple of different choices as far as SharePoint is concerned. Within SharePoint, you can start the workflow by using an out-of-the-box workflow, and there's a few of them. There's 6 of them altogether that you get out of the box. You go to the actual library, you go to library here, you click on workflow settings and add workflow, right? It will show you the different workflows that you have available. However, to do something more complex, you'll most probably want to use SharePoint Designer or something similar. Now, SharePoint Designer, free application, of course. You can make workflow in there, make pretty powerful workflows, actually. That's one way of doing it. Let me go ahead and do that. Start all programs. Within SharePoint group, in all programs, you're going to find SharePoint Designer 2010. Of course, like I said, it's free, so you can download it for free. You'll need to have full control or designer rights within a site to be able to use it. In SharePoint Designer, you can click on Open Site, or you can just click on the intranet.contoso.com/HR, and it will open up that site because it has opened it before. So it has a shortcut to it as a recent site. And within that, there's the workflows section, and in the workflows section you have the expense approval process. Don't click on that yet because you don't want to see exactly what it looks like currently, do you? It'd be better if we design it from scratch first. What do you think? So there's a couple of different ways once you're here to design the workflow. One is you can click on list workflow and say, all right, I want to design it on expense reports, right? That's what we want to do. That's one way to start off. Another way to start off the workflow is designing it graphically. So within SharePoint Designer 2010, we don't have an environment that lets you design graphical workflow. But the good thing is, if you have Visio Premium 2010, and I'll put that down here too, Visio Premium 2010, then you have a way to design the workflow in there. Now there are limitations, and I'll talk about those limitations as I start that out. So let me go to Start, All Programs, Microsoft Office, and here it is, Microsoft Visio 2010. So you get into Visio, there's a flowchart category for template. Now, of course, in this environment that you're working in, you will have this. But if you don't have this within your own environment, that just means, I mean, of course, you'll have flowchart. But what I was talking about is if you don't have this particular one, Microsoft SharePoint workflow, within your template, your flowchart template category, that means you do not have Visio Premium. So keep that in mind, that if you don't see the Microsoft SharePoint workflow template, that means you're running Visio Professional or Visio Standard. You're not running Visio Premium. So of course this is not a requirement for you to design workflows, but it's a really nice way to visualize your workflow. So I'm going to use that, click on Create. What you end up with are a bunch of different stencils: actions, conditions, terminators. Within terminators you find the start and stop point. So I'll go ahead and drag the start and stop, start and terminate. Within that you design your sequential workflow. If I go to conditions, there's a bunch of conditions available here. The second one here is the compare document field. That's a condition. So it appears as a diamond here. I'll throw this in there and say, you can double click on it and you can start typing in as like any other shape in Visio, right? And it's always good to provide these comments in there. So here I can say compare, or how about check to see if expense is over 1,000. Yeah. Check to see if expense is over 1,000. And if that is the case, what does it do? Well, we'll need some actions for that. Within actions, I'm going to grab the log to history list. We won't be doing anything complex here. We're going to log it to something called a history list, and we're going to send an email. And email is right here. Okay. And one more thing. I'll take this start approval process action and put that in here. Okay, I'll show you exactly what it does in a little bit. But up top, currently the pointer tool is what's selected in the Home tab. I'm going to select the connector tool, and I'm going to connect these things together. So connect that. Very important that you look for these red boxes when you're connecting it, so it knows the connection is made properly. Okay, so once all the connections are made, I could go back and continue my commenting here and say log expense is over 1,000. Email to, or email that expense is over 1,000. So this is a notification we're going to be doing to the person who had filled out the expense report, saying that, hey, your expense is over 1,000, but we're still going to go ahead and approve it, and we just want you to know that maybe you can also put in there expense, email that expense over 1,000, and something like let the person know that keep it under 1,000 next time. That's our company policy for any trips. Anyway, I'm not sure how you can afford that these days with the pricing of airlines and hotels, but anyway. All right. Start approval process. We can say get approval from manager. And then, because this is a condition here, we have two branches going out from here. The first branch here, I'm going to right click and say that this is the yes branch. So if the expense is above 1,000, you use this branch. Second branch here, I'm going to right click and say yes. The expense is under 1,000, then this is, oh, sorry, I should have said no. No, over here. Right? So now this workflow is done. You have to process this workflow. So you go to Process tab, obviously, and you click on Export. Okay, so Process tab, Export. Here I'm going to say maybe Webinar. And it's going to make a VWI file, Visio Workflow Interchange file. Save it. You'll see what it looks like when you go to SharePoint Designer. Okay, so if you're following along with some of the pieces here, you want to go back to SharePoint Designer, go into Workflows where we left off, and you click on Import from Visio up top. When the Import Workflow from Visio Drawing dialog comes up, you browse to find the webinar.vwi. Okay, so, and then you open that up, click on Next, and then it asks you, hey, what do you want to create this workflow as? Do you want to make it a list or a reusable workflow? Now, we won't have time to go into reusable workflows and all, which is an awesome functionality, but I'm just going to name this workflow expense and attach it to the expense reports list. It is actually a form library, but any library is also considered a list as well. Okay, so once you've attached it, you click on Finish. It shows you, or it will show you, the actual design environment. Now, when this comes up, you'll see that nothing is configured. Right, so what we did was we designed and modeled the workflow in Visio, but you still have to go to SharePoint Designer to actually do the configuration of this workflow. I'll click on this first field over here and find final total. The reason I'm able to find final total here is because this workflow is attached to the expense reports library. The expense reports library has a final total field because it's coming from the InfoPath form. Yeah? So once again, InfoPath form has a final total field which it's promoting as a column to the expense reports library. And now because we're attached to the expense reports library, it shows me the final total field among other fields like email and stuff like that in this workflow. And that's why you promote the fields. So a final total, you click on equals and change it to is greater than, and value here, let's say 1,000, right? And then login message, and see this is guiding you here, these comments. So these comments and that workflow that we built in Visio is trickling down here. If you were to ask yourself, hey, who would design the workflow in Visio? Well, it could be even a developer. It could be a business person. It could be anybody because you want to be able to visualize your workflow. And you do that over there. You bring it here. You say log expense is over 1,000. Then you email. The email window should come up. And I can do address book here and say, this is where you can do a lookup for a certain person. Or you can say, you know what, I'm not going to look for a specific person, I'm going to look for a person who filled out that form. So you do a workflow lookup for a user. You click on add. And see, now it's saying that in the current item, which would mean the current expense report form, do you have somebody in there? I mean, do you have a field in there that you can use to contact this person? Yes, we do. We have the email field, don't we? So email field, which is coming from the form, we can use here, and that's where the email is going to go to. Perfect. For subject, we can say expense is over 1,000. And here we can write a lot of good stuff, which I've written in a different workflow, but here, you know, we can just point them to the form that this is, excuse me, there's a delay over here. This is the form we are referring to. Okay, having some issues with typing. All right, well, you want to, of course, provide a link to the form that you're referring to. So you do an add or change lookup. And then there's a field called encoded absolute URL. Encoded absolute URL. You pick that, and automatically this will translate into the actual link to the item that this workflow is, that the workflow was kicked off for. Okay. Click OK, and here's a little bit more complicated stuff here. This is what this is doing here is starting an approval process, which is actually a pretty complicated process. Because when you get into approval, when you click on this approval word here, it starts up something called a process designer. And this specifically is the approval process designer. Okay. This overall is a task process, task-driven process. And when you start drilling into this stuff, it will show you there's a lot of good stuff going on in there. I wouldn't recommend you change things unless you know what you're doing, but you can change things to change the behavior of what this approval process does. This is basically the approval workflow. Okay. I'm going to go back here to my workflow and say that process this approval on the current item. Correct. With which user? Now, the manager of the person who filled out the form, how do you get to that is a question. So when I click on these users here, it has to, you know, you have to put in the person. Well, instead of putting in the person, you can do a lookup, as we did before. You click on the address book here. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. You can follow along if you want to. However, just later you'll have that at your disposal as well to see how you can pull up a manager by doing a lookup. So you do a workflow lookup for a user. You click on Add, right? The data source in this case is going to be the user profiles database. User profiles database is where all the information is coming from Active Directory usually. And Active Directory, of course, is where you know whose managers who. So we're going to choose that as a data source. The dialog box expands, and now I'm going to choose a field from user profiles, and that field is going to be manager. Okay, so user profiles has a lot of fields: office name, peers, office location. One I care about right now is manager. Return that person's information as their login name because we're assigning a task to that person. This is the little bit more trickier part as to, okay, so you're looking for a manager. How are you going to find the manager? Whose manager? Well, this is where you find the actual manager. You say that the account name of the person that I'm looking for their manager is a certain value. Okay, well, that has to be their login, basically, their account ID, right? So you do another lookup from this lookup. You click on this FX here, and now you're looking up within current item. You have an account ID. Great. Okay, so you can go ahead and get that. Now you're choosing the account ID to, you're sending the account ID to find the manager, okay, in the user profiles database. Once again, just follow along with this example if you want. Once you come back to the recording, you don't have to follow along to this exact one. You can if you want to, of course, but there's already a pre-built workflow in this environment. If you go back to workflows and click on expense approval process, you're going to find edit workflow. This is a pre-designed workflow. Looks very similar to what I did before. Within that, you're going to find this lookup. Okay, so that's the lookup that we just did, that we accomplished. It's already there. You don't have to really build it. You can just reference it. And once you're done making the workflow, and this is the workflow that we were just making right now, a couple of things happen here. So you want to pay attention as to what needs to happen to not just publish this workflow, but also turn on the Visio visualization. Okay? You design the workflow. Workflow is done. You go to workflow settings. First, I want to say, for most scenarios, you're going to say that start workflow automatically when an item is created, right? So when a new item is created, it does that. Now, the important part here, you want to click on this Show Workflow Visualization on Status page. Now, it's a pretty simple step, but there's some caveats that you should know as to, first of all, what it's doing, what it's going to be doing, and also what it's required for you to do this. So let me write those down here. For the Visio visualization to work, first of all, you need to have Visio Premium 2010 on your machine that you're making this from, that you're making this workflow from. And second, you need to have something called Visio Services configured and running. And Visio Services is also, just like Form Server, part of SharePoint Server Enterprise. So if you have SharePoint Server Enterprise, which I'm sure most of you do, you have this. It just needs to be turned on and set to be running and all. Okay? So once that is there, all you have to do, click on this checkbox, and you click on Publish. Just like that. I'm seeing a chat message here. Hang on a second. Let's see.
Hey, Asif, this might be a good point to ask some questions that we've been receiving. What do you think?
Actually, I'm almost done. So I want to show the final result, and then we'll open up for questions because we're almost out of time anyway.
Okay.
All right. The last point to note over here is when you publish the workflow out, you have a couple of different InfoPath forms that get generated automatically. The expense form and the expense approval form over here. And if you click on this form right here, .xsn file, excuse me, it will bring up InfoPath, and it will bring up that workflow form right there in InfoPath. Okay, that just takes, okay, so it's asking me for permission again. In this case, to provide the administrator permission, I actually need to get out for a second, because that's going to be found, where did I find it? More details. Okay, so that's the specific administrator password that's changed automatically. One of the awesome features of a CloudShare environment. Okay, so I didn't like that. I'm just going to cancel here for a second. It still should bring up the form. It might not let me publish it back. And if it doesn't work, I'm just going to show you the pre-built workflow, and I'll click on the form there to show you what it looks like. Yeah, it's having some trouble. All right. Well, okay, here we go. So I canceled. I finally got to the actual form. This is where you can design the form. And what this is this form is the approval form, right? That is already part of the workflow. Which this you can go ahead and design any way you want to. Just like we designed the library form before, now you design this workflow form, and both using InfoPath. Okay. Let me show you a quick view of what I've done for the other form that's already been pre-designed. So expense approval process, which is this workflow. If I go into workflow settings, here's a custom form that I've done before. Okay. This might also authenticate me and stuff, but I just want to show you, if it's able to, of the kind of customization that you can do. Here we go. Okay, so that's the form, the way it was customized. This is, once again, the workflow form that was generated by SharePoint Designer, customized using InfoPath. And that's the kind of customizations you can do pretty easily, because all you're doing is just bringing it up from the workflow, and then you're doing whatever you want, changing shading, inserting pictures, changing the buttons, whatever you want. Okay, once that's all said and done, you've published your workflow. Last thing here is, how does this behave? Well, let me fill out a form, add form. Here I'm going to put in, I can just choose anybody here from my Active Directory. Let's choose, okay, how about Lucas Keller? If I go into Active Directory, which of course most of you will not have access to, but I just want to show you that in Active Directory within your organization, you'll have the manager's name, Erica Shaley, or something in this case. So if I choose Lucas here, Lucas Keller, great, and I'll choose a department, and I'll choose a phone number, date, email, let's just, okay, should be Lucas, right? Quickly over here, we'll put in some bogus item, some quantity, 300, one more item. Okay, so it's way above 1,000. Let me save this as Lucas. You can actually automate this as well, so it saves automatically with a predefined name. Close it. So at this point in time, let's see. All right, here we go. Here's the other process that I started up, in progress. And okay. So the visualization did get produced. It's still working on it. It says that it's been queued. Let me redo it here. Here we go. Okay, so here's a visualization. Erica Shaley is the one that's been assigned the actual task, and this is being produced by Visio Services. Here's the actual task assigned to Erica. When I go into this task, I can go ahead and approve it. For this is the form that was not customized. If the form was customized, which is my other workflow, then it would look prettier. But now you see the visualization also changed. It says Erica has approved the workflow, or approved the process. All right, so I hope you got a good sense of how to design this process. If not, like I said before, you can review this recording again You can also review the video that's on that I gave you the link to before. I'm going to go ahead and put up that slide once again, and then we'll take the questions that you guys have. So here's the slide, some call to action. It has all the stuff in there. It also has my information in there too. And let's go ahead and take some questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Asif. So we have about 8 to 10 questions so far that have come in, and I'll do my best to just hand them off to you so that you can answer. The first one comes from Derek. He's asking, is it possible to use managed metadata on InfoPath forms yet?
No. And Derek, unfortunately not in InfoPath 2013 either. That is not supported. MMS is not supported, unfortunately. So that's the answer.
Okay. Joshua is asking, can you auto-populate the email from the name via AD?
Yes, that you can do. And in fact, I'm going to show you guys very quickly how to make that happen. With an InfoPath, this is actually a very simple thing that I can show here. If you're in the form and you go into name, here we go, 1 second. In account ID right here, double click on it, you go to default value and you can do a lookup, put in a function called username. Okay, there's a username function and that actually automatically brings up the person who's logged in. So right here, double click on the name picker, go into account ID, double click on that, default value once again, username is a function. That helps. Next question.
Okay, VJ asked, did you say InfoPath comes as a part of Office Professional 2010?
Professional Plus for sure. I think there's 2 different SKUs. There's also Professional. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that actually Professional does not come with InfoPath. It's Professional Plus on Enterprise and also Office Ultimate. It's hard to keep track of all the different SKUs that Microsoft has offered, but that's my understanding.
Okay, the next question is from Sebastian. Will the choice field work like lookup in the list view?
Will the choice field work like lookup? Well, if you have a lookup defined, and if you're, okay, so if you're customizing a list form, which is something that I did not show, if you do customize a list form, then yes, if there's a lookup in there, there's a choice in there, it will work exactly as it's designed to do. But I'm assuming that was the question. It would not work that way in a workflow form or a form library form, but it would definitely work that way in a list form.
Okay, and the next question came from Connie, and I think this was when you were just showing the visualizations for Visio Services. And she's asking, can this only be done in the enterprise version?
Yes. Visualization from Visio Services is only available in the enterprise version of SharePoint.
Okay, and then there are about 2 or 3 other questions. Next one is from Brian. If there's time, can the presenter explain how SharePoint workflow compares to other IBM tools?
IBM tools? I don't think we'll have time to go into that. That's a webinar by itself, to be honest. SharePoint workflow, I just want to make a quick comment that SharePoint workflow is still a good workflow, but not a very, very comprehensive workflow that that other BBM systems have provided and still provide. It's like I said, it's great, but you still need to do certain things to make it more solid within your environment. The out-of-the-box stuff is not going to be, it's not going to let you make enterprise-based workflows.
Okay, and then Rafal asked, I think this was 2 separate questions, or maybe it's a 2-part question. Why don't you use workflow variables was the first. And the second was, is there a replacement for InfoPath forms in SharePoint Foundation?
You can definitely use workflow variables. I just did not have a scenario at this point in time to use the workflow variable, but if you're interested, on SharePointVideos.com we have a bunch of videos on workflows. We actually have a whole set of videos on workflow, and I believe there's at least a few of those videos that talk about in depth on workflow variables. It's just that in this scenario we didn't have a reason for it. The second question about SharePoint Foundation and what is alternative for InfoPath. Well, if you have SharePoint Foundation and you will not be going to SharePoint Server Enterprise, then of course you cannot use InfoPath Forms Services or the Forms Server. It's not available to you. So the only other alternative that I know that's going to be a solid alternative is to go to a third-party provider. And I don't want to name any third-party providers, but there's a couple of really good ones out there which provide the Forms functionality. So do a search for SharePoint, Forms, third-party, something like that, and you're going to find those providers.
Okay, great. And then Michelle, earlier on in the webinar, asked something specific to 2007. Her client still uses 2007, and she's having an issue with an InfoPath workflow. Do you recommend a resource to help troubleshooting?
Well, we provide consulting if you're interested. So if you can go to SharePointVideos.com and click on the consulting tab, and one of our experts can definitely join you online to provide consulting. Aside from that, of course, there's lots of resources on the web that you can also consult. There's forums out there by Microsoft and others that you can ask questions at. If you need one-on-one help, we can definitely help, and I'm sure other consulting companies out there can help as well.
Okay, and there are some newer questions coming in as well. People kind of, looks like kind of waited to the end to think of what they wanted to ask, which is fantastic. Asif, do you still have time for a couple more minutes to take questions?
Sure, we can do a couple more minutes, yeah.
Okay. So let's see, Tammy is asking, could you have made the other fields, such as department, phone number, and email, auto-populate with the data from Active Directory once you selected the employee name?
You can, absolutely. The way that would work out, Tammy, is once you make that connection to get the information, let's say by using the username function or using a user profile service, web service, that brings in all the information that you need. So user profile service.asmx is the exact web service name. You can do a research on that. Once you bring in information from there, you have the data that you would need to populate into various widgets with various form controls, and that's where you can run what's called a rule within InfoPath and look into that to say, all right, well, depending on which ID is being shown, who's logged in, put in the manager here, put in the email for that person here, etc. So you can do that.
Okay, next question. Ritesh is asking, can you package the designer workflow as a WSP?
You can package in SharePoint Designer, let me say this qualified, in SharePoint Designer 2010, you can only package reusable workflows as WSPs. You can do that, and we have videos showing that as well if you like. If in SharePoint Designer 2013, which is the next version, which we're not talking about here, but in that you can package up even list and site workflows. But in 2010, you can only package up reusable workflows.
Okay, Rob is asking a question for clarification. Did Asif say you need Visio Premium to see the workflow graphic or just Visio Services turned on?
Yeah, you need both. So you need Visio Premium 2010 on your client. Okay, so let me actually restate that. I think he's asking, what do you need to be able to see it? At the server level, you have SharePoint Server Enterprise, and that's what would be required to be able to, for any people, any employee to see it using their browser. And all they need is a browser to actually view the visualization. For the person who's producing the visualization, so the person who's actually going into SharePoint Designer, clicking on that checkbox and producing it, that person needs to have Visio Premium 2010 on their box, on their machine, to be able to publish the workflow with the visualization. That's the deal.
Okay, and then the last question, maybe we can, if this one is, if the answer is brief, maybe this can be the last of two questions. Mario is asking, what prerequisites would a user need to have in order to use and fill out one of these forms?
They need to be a contributor.
Okay, and then last question, Michelle is asking another one. Can workflow variables update the form library?
Can workflow variables update the form library? Well, workflow variables work like any content that you have within the workflow. So when the workflow is running, you have that within the session. And then if you say that, hey, you know, the workflow variable X has some content in there, I want to go ahead and push it out as a list item, or I want to push it out as an update to an existing list item, something like that. You can do that, yes. So if that's the question, then yes, you can use the information contained within the workflow variables to push out to list or libraries.
Okay, so why don't we stop there? If there's any other questions that we were not able to pass to Asif, then we can send those out to you via email to follow up after the webinar.
Sure.
And also there,
Okay,
awesome. And then there were also a few questions about will a link to the recording for this webinar be made available? And the answer to that is yes. We will be sending follow-up emails to everyone who attended, and included in that will be a link to the recording for this session. I just want to thank you everyone for attending, and thank you very much, Asif, for presenting, and have a great day, everyone.
Great. It was a pleasure. Take care, everybody.